the DCCC is supposed to help Democrats running for office in the House. And they do if you agree to their rules. The Young Turks broke a story about a memo they sent to a lot of the candidates saying that you got to spend 75% of your money on paid communication. Then they sent them a list of consultants, coincidentally happened to be linked to the people who work at the DCCC who they should use to spend that money. And now they're going around the country attacking progressives who have not been preordained as their pick. What does the DCCC demand when they're looking to back you? One, that you have a lot of money. Either you're a millionaire or billionaire yourself, or you know a lot of millionaires and can raise a lot of money. Do they ask you what your policy positions are? No. Do they care if you're more progressive? Well, they might, but in the wrong direction. But they don't even bother asking in the beginning. And the second thing they want is to make sure that if you have that money, you're going to spend it with their friends. So some of the progressive candidates have actually raised more money than the establishment candidates. But since it's not going to the consultant friends of the DCCC, they are furious about it. So they attacked a progressive in Texas, Laura Moser. She's got her primary coming up tomorrow. Be very interesting to see what happens there, and I want to tell you a little bit about that at the end of this story. But it turns out now they are attacking another progressive in Pennsylvania. His name is Greg Edwards. He's also a Justice Democrat, which means he does not take corporate cash. The people in Washington do not like that. Their bread and butter is corporate cash. So look at this, lo and behold, they're against Greg Edwards as well. So let's find out how. Now we go to the Washington Post, Dave Weigel with another good story here. He says the drama in Pennsylvania is centered on Greg Edwards, a pastor running for a newly drawn swing seat in the Lehigh Valley. On Thursday, he told the Washington Post that the DCCC had approached the local Democrats to ask whether he could be persuaded to seek another office. Let me be clear, a lower office. You are not welcome here. A pastor running as a Democrat would appear to be a good story, unless of course the pastor was uncorrupted. Edwards says, as far as I know, they only targeted one candidate to leave this race, the most progressive candidate, the only candidate of color. Their inability to understand why that's fundamentally wrong says everything. I want to come back to that reasoning in a second, but more from Weigel here. The DCCC pushed back on Edwards' claims, saying that the unique situation in Pennsylvania where courts struck down a gerrymandered map and created 18 new districts just weeks before parties' primaries prompted them to ask several candidates if they might run instead for offices further down the ballot. Okay, before I get to why they might do that and whether that's legitimate or not, let's figure out if they actually did do that. So Tim Persico, a DCCC operative, had indeed asked local Democrats if Edwards or ex-Allentown solicitor Susan Wild might leave the crowded primary to run for state senate, so a lower seat than United States Representative, which is what they're running for. And Meredith Kelly, the communications director for the DCCC, doesn't quite deny it. She says at the end that it's not exactly right, but let me give you her full quote. She says Pennsylvania's congressional maps were just completely redrawn, and it's very typical for candidates to recalculate their campaign plans as a result. As a Pennsylvania native, Tim knows the importance of local politics in the state and went to Allentown for an early on-the-ground assessment of the political landscape in this newly drawn district, particularly regarding the multiple Democratic candidates' next steps. This is completely normal. He did not, however, ask anyone to drop out of the congressional race. I think that she phrased it a little bit wrong there. If she had said he didn't demand that anyone drop out of the race, he didn't force them to drop out of the race, that would be technically correct. But it appears he literally asked them, hey, do you mind dropping out of the race and going to further down the ballot? In fact, here's more confirmation. David Marshall, who runs the Pennsylvania Democrats State Senate Campaign Committee, said that Persico had only asked them, quote, if we'd be interested in any of these folks if they dropped into down ballot races. Well, that appears to be a confirmation. He might think that that's perfectly normal, but that is a confirmation. And Greg Edwards, the candidate, responds, I just say that the DCCC got caught red-handed and admitted as much to us. And apparently they did talk to the campaign, and the Edwards campaign took it as an admission as well that they were trying to get him out of the race. Now, Does it make sense or does it not make sense? Look, some of these races are crowded. They all have different dynamics depending on the states. And if you have a runoff primary, sometimes they say, well, if there's too many Democrats in the race, it'll help the few Republicans get into the runoff. I don't really believe in that either, but that's an argument that could be made. But the main reason they do it, especially in a place like Pennsylvania, is they think, no, we want the guy who is most electable. Now, I think they genuinely believe that. They also want a guy who's going to funnel money to them, but I think that they have gotten themselves to believe that they're looking for someone who's electable. The problem comes in the next step, which is their assumptions about who's electable. So there's several different layers to it. For them, there is no other layer. There's one layer, basically. How much money do you have and are you willing to spend it with our consultants? Okay, and because that's their only metric of viability. Then number two layer is, okay, maybe Greg Edwards has more volunteers. Maybe he's got more media attention. Maybe he's winning a straw poll, as now Laura Moser is, right? But they don't look at those metrics, whereas I think they should look at those metrics. And they've been told and now have internalized from the Rahm Emanuels of the world that quote unquote centrists are the ones more likely to win in a district that used to be Republican. But what does it mean to be centrist? They have interpreted that to mean if you take corporate cash and you're willing to vote with the Republicans either from time to time or quite often. Is there good evidence to prove that those Republican-like candidates do better electorally? The answer is no, there isn't. The Intercept ran a great piece about the 2006 elections that was supposed to be the test case for Rahm Emanuel being right, because Rahm Emanuel was running the DCCC at the time and they had a wave election where Democrats swept into office. But if you actually broke down the people who won that race, it was often the candidates that Rahm Emanuel did not back. He wouldn't even send them any money and they won their race anyway. And a lot of the candidates that Rahm Emanuel did back with a ton of corporate cash that ran as Republican light actually lost seats that could have been winnable. They don't have good evidence on their side. And they think, because they've been told by the Rahm Emanuels of the world, oh, progressives don't know anything, progressives should be avoided, they're not practical, they're not pragmatic, all these things. Or they don't understand politics. No, you don't understand politics. You don't understand that a populist message is more likely to work. That a guy like Greg Edwards, who's a pastor from the community, saying, I'm going to look out for the community, and yes, I'm going to fight to raise your wages. That's not an impractical message. Your idiotic message of, I will help corporations and they might or might not help you at a later time is not resonating. It's not working with voters. And your obsession with corporate money has now become clearly counterproductive. And by the way, all the money you're throwing in television is no longer working. So all those old assumptions about who is electable are wrong. And then there's a third layer, which is, in this case, race. Now, I would be surprised, and some of you might disagree, but I would be surprised if the guys at the DCCC are some sort of rabid racist who are like, oh, we got to chase that black pastor out of the race. But do they have certain assumptions about who's electable in a Republican district? They might think, oh, in a district that, again, used to be Republican, all the districts have been redrawn in Pennsylvania. So that is totally up in the air. And by the way, if there's a wave coming, that's the whole point. You unseat Republicans and get Democrats to win. They have this assumption that those districts are like incredibly right wing and all they care about is giving everything to corporations and perhaps discriminating against certain people. So given their assumptions, then it becomes less surprising that they would think maybe Greg Edwards is not electable. I can't wait to prove them wrong. Okay, I think progressives are far more electable. I think we're going to find out because we're going to have these primaries. The Pennsylvania primaries are coming up soon. By the way, if you'd like for this inane strategy of the corporate establishment Democrats that backfire, go help Greg Edwards. We're not afraid to share his links with you guys, edwardsforpa.com. Get Greg on the ballot, edwardsforpa.com/events. Donate so that he can compete with the big donor money that's being poured in by the Democrats. justicedemocrats.com/edwardsattack. So we'll have all those links down below in the description box on YouTube and the comment section on Facebook. Now, did it work in the case of Laura Moser? Because now they're attacking Greg Edwards, but we already have the test case from last week when they attacked Laura Moser, who's another Justice Democrat, also uncorrupted, also deeply progressive, running in Texas, who has an election tomorrow, by the way, a primary. We're going to find out definitively tomorrow night. You should check out our live coverage of that on tytnetwork.com tomorrow night at 8 o'clock Eastern. Now, here's a report from the Washington Post about that. According to the poll conducted with 726 likely Democratic primary voters, Moser has moved from 6th to 2nd place since January, which would secure her a place in the May runoff, exactly what the DCCC had tried to prevent. Oops. They attacked her publicly and said, she's the real progressive in the race. And people are like, oh, thank you, appreciate that. We'll move her up to 2nd place and hopefully get her in the runoff. So now that poll, by the way, done by the Republicans, so take it with a grain of salt, but no one is disputing the numbers involved. And the Republicans also have totally wrong assumptions about who is and who is not electable. So now finally back to now Politico on the Laura Moser situation and an update on it. The DCCC has warned for months, they explain, that it would wade into crowded primary fields here and elsewhere, either to pick favorites or harm candidates it sees as weaker in the general election. But there are a few signs here that the DCCC's punches have landed. Instead, Moser's fundraising has ticked up. She's collected more than $130,000 since the DCCC post on February 22nd. Oops, all you did was help her. So I hope that is the case with Greg Edwards as well. At least the DCCC has now told you who the real progressive in the race is. You might want to act based on that information. By the way, we will also have Laura Moser's links down below. And if you want to find out all of the uncorrupted candidates, go to justdemocrats.com and you'll see there are 52 candidates across the country. And apparently the Democratic establishment is now running scared. You just watched the video by the Young Turks, the home of the revolution. If you'd like to get the full show, come join us and become a member. tytnetwork.com/join.